The auction block stood in the center of Millerville's town square, like a monument to human cruelty. On this humid Tennessee morning in 1847, a crowd of rough men had gathered, their eyes cold and calculating as they examined the merchandise. But this wasn't a cattle auction or a slave market. This was something far more disturbing, a debt auction, where desperate families sold their own to pay what they owed. And standing on that block, trembling under the weight of 400 pounds and a lifetime of shame, was Clara Whitman. The 26-year-old woman had never imagined her life would come to this moment, where her own uncle would sell her like livestock to the highest bidder. But what none of these cruel men knew, what even Clara herself had forgotten, was that sometimes the most broken souls carry the purest hearts. And sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden planks of the auction platform groaned under Clara Whitman's feet as she stood before the jeering crowd, her massive frame draped in the only dress that still fit her, a faded brown cotton sack that had once belonged to her deceased mother. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Millerville's town square, but Clara felt cold despite the heat, her hands shaking as she clutched the torn fabric at her sides. "Now here's a strong one," bellowed Jeremiah Caldwell, the auctioneer whose voice had been selling human misery for the better part of 2 decades. Clara Whitman, age 26, healthy as a horse and twice as sturdy. Perfect for heavy labor, cooking for large crews, or any work requiring substantial presence. The crowd erupted in cruel laughter, and Clara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She had known this day was coming for weeks, ever since her Uncle Silas had looked her in the eye and told her she was costing him too much to feed. "You eat enough for 3 men, he had said, his voice sharp with disgust. "And you ain't worth half of one. Time you earned your keep somewhere else." Clara's story had begun in tragedy and descended into nightmare. Born to loving parents on a small farm outside Millerville, she had been a normal, healthy child until the fever took both her mother and father when she was 12. The same illness that killed them had nearly claimed Clara's life, leaving her bedridden for months. During those long weeks of recovery, food became her only comfort, her only escape from the grief that threatened to consume her. Her Uncle Silas, her father's brother, had taken her in reluctantly. A bitter man who had never married and saw children as burdens, he made it clear from the beginning that Clara was an unwelcome obligation. As she grew larger, his resentment grew with her. He fed her scraps and leftovers, but somehow Clara continued to gain weight, her body seeming to store every morsel as if preparing for another famine. "She's got the constitution of a plow horse," Silas would tell anyone who would listen. "Eats like a regiment but moves like molasses, worthless as tits on a boar hog." The years had been unkind to Clara in every way. By the time she reached 20, she weighed nearly 300 pounds and had become a local curiosity. Children would throw stones at her when she ventured into town. Adults would cross the street to avoid her, and the few potential suitors who had ever shown interest quickly disappeared when they saw her true size. But Clara's weight was only part of her burden. Silas had worked her like a draft animal, forcing her to tend his farm from dawn to dusk despite her size. She hauled water, chopped wood, tended livestock, and cooked enormous meals that she was rarely allowed to share. When she collapsed from exhaustion, Silas would kick her awake and set her back to work. "Lazy cow," he would snarl. "You eat my food, you work for it. And if you can't work fast enough, maybe you need to eat less." The cruel irony was that the harder Clara worked, the hungrier she became, and the more her uncle resented feeding her. It was a vicious cycle that had consumed 14 years of her life, turning her from a grieving child into a broken woman who had forgotten what kindness felt like. The final straw had come 3 Weeks ago when Silas lost a significant sum in a poker game to Marcus Thornfield, the wealthiest and most ruthless man in 3 counties. Thornfield had given Silas 30 days to pay his debt or face the consequences. Everyone in Millerville knew what Thornfield's consequences looked like: broken bones, burned barns, and families driven from their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. "I ain't losing my farm over cards," Silas had declared that night, his voice slurred with whiskey and desperation. "But I got an idea how to settle this debt. That niece of mine's got to be worth something to somebody. Big as she is, she could work any man's farm. Time she started earning her keep instead of just eating it." Clara had begged him to reconsider, had promised to work harder, eat less, do anything to avoid this fate. But Silas's mind was made up. He placed an advertisement in the regional newspaper: strong female worker for sale. Excellent cook, farm laborer, capable of heavy work. Auction to be held in Millerville Town Square. The advertisement had drawn attention from across the region. Men came looking for workers who could handle the backbreaking labor that frontier life demanded. Some sought cooks who could feed large crews of farmhands or lumber workers. Others had darker purposes in mind, seeing in Clara's desperation an opportunity to acquire a woman who would have no choice but to accept whatever treatment they chose to inflict. Now, standing on the auction block with dozens of crude men evaluating her like livestock, Clara felt the last remnants of her dignity crumble away. The auctioneer continued his sales pitch, describing her as if she were a piece of farm equipment rather than a human being. "Look at those arms," Caldwell shouted, grabbing Clara's wrist and forcing her to raise her massive arm. "Thick as tree trunks. This woman could haul logs, plow fields, lift anything you need moved. And that size means she's got the stamina for long days of hard work." Clara wanted to die. She wanted to simply sink through the wooden platform and disappear into the earth below. The men in the crowd were making comments that grew increasingly vulgar, speculating about what such a large woman might be capable of, placing bets on how much she could lift, discussing her as if she were deaf and mute rather than standing. Right in front of them, "What's the starting bid?" called out a voice from the crowd. Clara couldn't see the speaker through her tears, but his voice was rough and gravelly, the kind that came from years of hard living. $50, Caldwell announced. For a worker this substantial, $50 is practically theft. The bidding began slowly. A lumber foreman offered $60, looking for someone who could cook for his crew of 30 men. A plantation owner from Georgia raised it to $75, mentioning his need for workers who could handle the heavy lifting that smaller women couldn't manage. Each bid felt like another nail in the coffin of Clara's humanity. As the amounts climbed, Clara found herself wondering what would happen to her when this nightmare ended. Would she spend the rest of her life cooking for men who saw her as nothing more than a kitchen appliance? Would she be worked to death in some remote lumber camp where no one would ever think to look for her? Would she simply disappear, another forgotten soul ground up by the cruelty of a world that measured human worth in dollars and productivity? The bidding had reached $120 when a commotion at the edge of the crowd drew everyone's attention. A group of Cherokee men had arrived, their presence causing murmurs of unease among the white spectators. Relations between the Cherokee and the white settlers in this part of Tennessee had been tense for years, ever since the government had tried to force the tribe's removal to Oklahoma. Though many Cherokee had resisted and remained in their ancestral lands, they were viewed with suspicion and often outright hostility by their white neighbors. The Cherokee group was led by a man who commanded immediate attention. Tall and powerfully built, with long black hair and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, he moved through the crowd with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to leadership. His clothes were a mixture of traditional Cherokee and white styles, buckskin leggings beneath a white cotton shirt with a silver gorget at his throat that marked his status as a chief. "What are they doing here?" Someone in the crowd muttered nervously. "Probably looking to cause trouble," another voice replied. "Should have stayed on the reservation where they belong." The Cherokee leader ignored the hostile whispers. His attention focused entirely on Clara. Their eyes met across the crowd. And Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Someone looking at her without disgust, without calculation, without cruelty. His gaze was steady and thoughtful, as if he was seeing something in her that no one else could perceive. $150, the Cherokee chief said, his voice carrying clearly across the square despite its quiet tone. The crowd fell silent. $150 was more money than most of these men saw in 6 months. It was an astronomical sum for what they considered a purchase of questionable value. "Now hold on there," called out Marcus Thornfield, the same man whose poker winnings had started this entire ordeal. "This is a white woman being sold to settle a white man's debt. What business do you Cherokee have here?" The chief turned his attention to Thornfield, and Clara saw something dangerous flicker in those dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "My name is Joseph Strongbeer, and I am chief of the Wolf clan. I have come here to conduct business just as you have. My money is as good as any man's, and I will not be turned away because of the color of my skin." Thornfield's face reddened with anger, but before he could respond, the auctioneer intervened. Caldwell had been in this business long enough to know that money was money, regardless of its source. "The bid stands at $150, he announced. "Do I hear 160? The crowd remained silent, even for men accustomed to viewing human beings as property. The sight of a Cherokee chief bidding on a white woman was unsettling. The implications were unclear, but they stirred up fears and prejudices that ran deep in the frontier community. "Going once," Caldwell called out, scanning the crowd for any competing bids. Clara found herself holding her breath. She knew nothing about this Cherokee chief beyond his name, but something in his demeanor suggested he was different from the other men who had been bidding on her. There was no cruelty in his eyes, no calculation about her value as a work animal. He looked at her as if she were a person rather than property. Going twice. Still no competing bids. The crowd seemed frozen, uncertain how to process what was happening. "Sold to Chief Strongbeer for $150. As the auctioneer's gavel fell, Clara felt her legs give way beneath her. She had been sold, purchased like a piece of livestock, and her buyer was a man she had never seen before from a culture she knew nothing about. The Cherokee had been portrayed as savages in every story she had ever heard. Dangerous people who scalped white settlers and conducted heathen rituals in the wilderness. But as Chief Strongbeer approached the platform to complete his purchase, Clara saw nothing savage in his bearing. He moved with dignity and purpose, counting out the money with careful precision before handing it to the auctioneer. When the transaction was complete, he turned to face Clara for the first time since making his winning bid. "My name is Joseph Strongbeer," he said quietly, his English accented but clear. "You are Clara Whitman?" Clara nodded, unable to trust her voice. Up close, the Cherokee chief was even more imposing than he had appeared from a distance. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the kind of physical presence that came from a lifetime of outdoor work. But it was his eyes that captured Clara's attention, dark brown and intelligent, with a depth that suggested wisdom earned through experience. "I know this is frightening for you," Joseph continued, his voice gentle despite the crowd of hostile faces surrounding them. "But I want you to understand that you are not my property. You are under my protection, and no harm will come to you in my care." The words were so unexpected that Clara wondered if she had misheard them. Protection? Not property? These concepts seemed impossible given the circumstances of their meeting. Before she could respond, Uncle Silas appeared at her side. his face flushed with excitement over his unexpected windfall. "There you go, Clara," he said with false cheerfulness. "All settled up nice and legal. You mind the chief here and do whatever work he sets you to. Don't go causing any trouble." Silas turned to Joseph, extending his hand in what he clearly hoped would be seen as a friendly gesture. "She's a good worker, Chief, strong as an ox and used to hard labor. Just keep her fed and she'll serve you well." Joseph looked at the extended hand for a long moment before responding. "Mr. Whitman, your business here is concluded. What happens to Clara now is between her and me." The dismissal was polite but firm, and Silas's face darkened with embarrassment. He had clearly expected to be thanked for providing such excellent merchandise, and the chief's cool response left him uncertain how to proceed. "Well, yes, of course," Silas stammered. "Just wanted to make sure you understood what you were getting." "I understand perfectly," Joseph replied, his gaze never leaving Silas's face. "The question is whether you understand what you have done." There was something ominous in the chief's tone that made Silas take a step backward. For the first time since this ordeal began, Clara saw uncertainty in her uncle's eyes, as if he was beginning to realize that he might have made a mistake he couldn't undo. Joseph turned back to Clara, offering her his arm. "Will you come with me?" he asked, the question clearly giving her a choice rather than issuing a command. Clara looked around the town square one last time, taking in the faces of people who had watched her humiliation without a trace of compassion. These people had known her for years, had seen her grow from a grieving child into a broken woman, and not one of them had ever offered her kindness or help. Now they watched her leave with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. As if she were entertainment that had reached its conclusion, she took Joseph's arm, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt sleeve, and allowed him to help her down from the platform. As they walked through the crowd toward where his men waited with horses, Clara heard the whispers that followed in their wake. "What's he want with something like that? Cherokee got strange tastes, I reckon. Probably gonna use her for some kind of heathen ritual." Joseph seemed to hear the comments as well, but his expression remained impassive. When they reached his group, he spoke briefly to his companions in Cherokee, the liquid syllables of his native language a stark contrast to the harsh English that had surrounded Clara all morning. One of the Cherokee men brought forward a sturdy horse, and Clara felt a moment of panic. She had never ridden a horse in her life, and her size made the prospect seem impossible. I can't," she whispered to Joseph. "I'm too heavy. I'll hurt the horse." Joseph studied her face, reading the genuine concern there. "This is Thunder," he said, stroking the animal's neck. "He is the strongest horse in our village, and he has carried far heavier loads than you. But if you are not comfortable riding, we can arrange for a wagon." The kindness in his offer brought tears to Clara's eyes. When was the last time someone had asked about her comfort? When was the last time anyone had shown concern for her fears or feelings? I think I would prefer the wagon," she admitted. Joseph nodded and spoke again to his men. Within minutes, they had produced a sturdy wagon with a comfortable seat, padded with buffalo robes. Joseph helped Clara climb up, his touch careful and respectful, then took the reins himself. As the wagon began to move, Clara took one last look at Millerville. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, the house where she had lived with her uncle, the town where she had endured years of humiliation, the people who had watched her degradation without lifting a finger to help. But she was also leaving behind the chains of a life that had offered nothing but cruelty and despair. Whatever lay ahead with this Cherokee chief and his people, it couldn't possibly be worse than what she was leaving behind. As the wagon rolled away from the town square and into the Tennessee wilderness, Clara Whitman began the most important journey of her life, not just a physical journey to a new place, but a spiritual journey toward discovering who she really was beneath the weight of years of shame and abuse. Behind them, the crowd was already dispersing, moving on to other business, other entertainments. They had no idea that they had just witnessed the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about worth, beauty, and the true nature of human value. And ahead of them, in the hidden valleys where the Cherokee had made their stand against removal, waited a community that measured a person's worth not by their appearance or their productivity, but by the content of their character and the generosity of their spirit. Clara had no way of knowing it yet, but she was about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected salvation comes from the most unlikely sources. And sometimes the heart that has been broken by the world's cruelty can be healed by its unexpected kindness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically as they rolled deeper into the Tennessee wilderness, each turn of the spokes carrying Clara Whitman further from everything familiar and deeper into a world she had never imagined. The morning sun filtered through the canopy of oak and hickory trees, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow across the forest floor. For the first time in years, Clara found herself noticing beauty instead of focusing solely on survival. Joseph Strongbeer guided the wagon with practiced ease, his movements economical and confident. He had remained largely silent since leaving Millerville, allowing Clara time to process the monumental change in her circumstances. But she could feel his occasional glances, assessing not her worth as property, but her state of mind as a human being, thrust into an impossible situation. Other Cherokee warriors rode in a loose formation around the wagon, their presence both protective and somehow comforting. Clara had expected them to stare at her with the same mixture of disgust and curiosity she was accustomed to, but instead they seemed to treat her presence as simply another fact of their journey, neither remarkable nor shameful. After they had traveled for nearly 2 hours, Joseph pulled the wagon to a halt beside a clear mountain stream. The horses needed water, he explained, and it would be wise to rest before continuing deeper into Cherokee territory. "Are you thirsty?" he asked Clara, offering her a leather water skin. The simple courtesy caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had shown concern for her comfort? "Yes, thank you," she managed, accepting the water gratefully. It was clean and cold, nothing like the stagnant well water she had grown accustomed to at her uncle's farm. As the horses drank from the stream, Joseph's men began unpacking what appeared to be a modest meal. Clara watched nervously, wondering if she would be expected to eat in front of these strangers, wondering if they had brought enough food to include her, wondering if they expected her to serve them instead. "Clara," Joseph said quietly, settling on a fallen log beside the stream, "may I speak with you honestly?" She nodded, though her stomach clenched with anxiety. Honest conversations in her experience usually meant someone was about to tell her everything that was wrong with her. "I know you must be frightened," he began, his voice gentle but direct. "You have been sold like property to a man you do not know, from a people you have probably been taught to fear. You do not know what I expect of you, what your life will be like, or whether you will ever see your home again." Clara felt tears beginning to well up. He had summarized her terror so accurately that it was almost unbearable to hear it spoken aloud. "But I want you to understand something very important," Joseph continued. "Among my people, no person can own another person. What happened in that town square today was a white man's custom, not ours. I did not buy you, I bought your freedom." The words were so unexpected that Clara wasn't sure she had heard them correctly. "I don't understand," she whispered. Joseph was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. 3 days ago, one of our scouts brought word about the auction. He had been in Millerville trading for supplies when he heard men talking about a woman being sold to pay her uncle's debts. This disturbed us greatly, as we have seen too many people treated as property by your government." Clara listened in amazement as Joseph explained that the Cherokee Council had debated what, if anything, they should do about the situation. Some had argued it was not their business, that interfering in white affairs would only bring trouble upon their community. Others had felt a moral obligation to act if they could. My grandmother, who was very wise, said something that decided the matter, Joseph continued. She said that the Creator judges us not by whether we help our own people, but by whether we help those who have no one else to help them. She said that a woman being sold like cattle by her own family was surely someone who needed help. The concept was so foreign to Clara's experience that she struggled to comprehend it. These people, whom she had been taught to view as dangerous savages, had actually held a council meeting to discuss helping her. A white woman they had never met, whose people had tried to drive them from their ancestral lands. Why? She asked. Simply, why would you risk yourselves for a stranger? Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. Because in our beliefs, there are no strangers. There are only relatives we have not yet met. And because my grandmother also said that sometimes the Creator places people in our path, not just so we can help them, but so they can help us. Before Clara could ask what he meant by that cryptic comment, one of the Cherokee men approached and spoke rapidly in their native language. Joseph nodded and rose from the log. We should continue, he said to Clara. We still have several hours of travel ahead, and it is important that we reach our territory before dark. As they resumed their journey, Clara found herself studying Joseph more closely. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from outdoor work and natural confidence. But it was his manner that intrigued her most, the way he spoke to his men with respect rather than commands, the way he seemed to consider her comfort without making a show of it, the way he treated her as a person worthy of explanation rather than property to be managed. The landscape began to change as they traveled deeper into Cherokee territory. The forests grew denser, the streams ran clearer, and Clara began to notice signs of human habitation that were unlike anything she had seen before. Gardens planted in natural clearings, with crops arranged in patterns that seemed to work with the landscape rather than against it. Paths that curved around significant trees rather than cutting straight through them. Everything seemed designed to exist in harmony with the natural world. Your people live differently than white farmers, Clara observed, trying to make conversation. We believe the land is not something to be conquered, Joseph replied. It is something to be partnered with. We take what we need, but we also give back. Your people seem to believe that nature exists only to serve human purposes. Clara considered this, thinking about her uncle's farm with its straight-plowed furrows and cleared fields that constantly fought against the forest's attempts to reclaim them. I never thought about it that way, she admitted. There are many ways to think about the world, Joseph said. Perhaps that is something you will learn among us. As the afternoon wore on, Clara began to notice that they were being watched. Not with hostility, but with curiosity. Cherokee men and women emerged from the forest at various points along their route, observing the unusual sight of their chief returning with a white woman. None of them stared rudely or made comments, but Clara could feel their interest in speculation. They're wondering about me, she said, stating the obvious. Yes, Joseph agreed. It has been many years since we welcomed a white person into our community. The last ones who came brought disease and tried to steal our children for their schools. My people have reason to be cautious. The casual mention of stolen children sent a chill through Clara. She had heard rumors about government boarding schools that forcibly separated Indian children from their families, but she had never thought about the impact on the families left behind. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know. Joseph glanced at her with surprise. You apologize for things you did not do. My people did them. My government did them. I benefited from policies that hurt your people, even if I didn't choose them. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, and Clara worried that she had something wrong. Finally he spoke. That is not how most white people think about such things. Maybe that's part of the problem. The conversation was interrupted by the appearance of a group of Cherokee children who burst from the forest with the fearless curiosity of youth. They ran alongside the wagon, chattering excitedly in their own language while stealing glances at Clara. Their interest seemed born of simple curiosity rather than the cruel amusement she was accustomed to from white children. One little girl, perhaps 7 years old, called out something to Joseph that made him laugh. He responded in Cherokee, then translated for Clara. "She wants to know if you are a giant like the ones in the old stories," he explained. "I told her you are just a person who is larger than most, and that being large means you have more room in your heart for kindness." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. When was the last time someone had described her size as anything other than a burden or a joke? When was the last time anyone had suggested that her difference might be connected to something positive? What did she say to that? Clara asked. Joseph smiled. "She said that must be why you look so sad, because your heart is so big that it holds more sadness too, but that maybe now you can fill it with happiness instead." The innocent wisdom of the child's response overwhelmed Clara completely. She began to sob, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from years of pent-up pain and loneliness. Joseph immediately pulled the wagon to a halt, his face filled with concern. "I'm sorry," Clara gasped between sobs. "I don't mean to cry. I just ... No one has ever said anything like that about me before. No one has ever suggested that being different might be anything other than awful." Joseph handed her a clean cloth and waited patiently while she composed herself. The Cherokee children had stopped running alongside the wagon, their faces showing concern for this strange woman's distress. "Among my people," Joseph said gently, "we believe that the Creator makes each person exactly as they are meant to be. If you are larger than other women, it is because the Creator has work for you that requires your size. If your heart feels pain more deeply, it is because you are meant to understand the pain of others and help heal it." "But I don't understand," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "I've never been good at anything. I'm clumsy and slow, and I eat too much and I can't do fine work because my hands are too big. What possible purpose could there be in making someone like me?" Joseph studied her face with those penetrating dark eyes. "Perhaps you will discover that among us. Perhaps that is why the Creator placed you in our path." As they resumed their journey, Clara found herself pondering Joseph's words. The idea that her differences might serve some purpose, rather than simply making her a burden, was so revolutionary that she could barely process it. All her life, she had been told that she was too much. Too big, too slow, too hungry, too sad, too different. The possibility that she might be exactly what someone needed was almost too wonderful to believe. The sun was beginning to set when they finally reached what Joseph identified as the heart of Cherokee territory. Clara had expected to find a village similar to the white settlements she knew, a cluster of houses arranged around a central street with clear boundaries between civilization and wilderness. Instead, she found something that seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself. Cherokee homes were scattered throughout a broad valley, each positioned to take advantage of natural features like streams, rock outcroppings, or groves of trees. Gardens flowed seamlessly into forest, and paths meandered like deer trails between dwellings. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played in clearings, and the whole community seemed to exist in harmony with its natural surroundings. But it was the people who amazed Clara most. As word of their arrival spread, Cherokee families began emerging from their homes to greet Joseph's return. Men, women, and children gathered around the wagon, their faces showing curiosity about Clara, but also warmth and welcome. No one stared rudely or made cruel comments about her appearance. Instead, they seemed to treat her arrival as simply another interesting development in their community's life. An elderly Cherokee woman approached the wagon with a dignity that reminded Clara of royalty. Her hair was silver white and braided, With beads, her dress was beautiful deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork, and her eyes held the wisdom of many decades. Joseph immediately climbed down from the wagon and embraced her with obvious affection. "Clara," he said, helping her down from the wagon with careful respect, "I would like you to meet my grandmother, Elizabeth Morningstar. She is the one whose—" Wisdom convinced Elizabeth Morningstar led Clara through the Cherokee village as darkness settled over the Tennessee mountains, oil lamps and cooking fires creating pools of warm light throughout the scattered homes. Clara moved carefully, acutely aware of her size and spaces designed for people much smaller than herself, but no one seemed to notice or care about her cautious movements. "You will stay with me," Elizabeth announced, not as a question but as a decision made with the authority of someone accustomed to having her wisdom respected. "My house has room, and I have been alone too long since my husband joined the ancestors." Clara wanted to protest that she didn't want to be a burden, but something in the elderly woman's manner discouraged argument. Elizabeth moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades making decisions for the good of her community, and Clara found herself following without question. Elizabeth's home was unlike anything Clara had ever seen. Built from logs and stone in harmony with a natural rock formation, it seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Inside, the main room was spacious and comfortable, with beautiful woven rugs covering the floor and intricate baskets hanging from the walls. A stone fireplace dominated one end of the room, its warmth reaching every corner of the space. "Sit," Elizabeth commanded, gesturing toward a chair that looked sturdy enough to support Clara's weight. "You have had a long day, and tomorrow will bring new challenges." As Clara settled gratefully into the chair, Elizabeth began moving around the room with practiced efficiency, gathering bowls and preparing what appeared to be a meal. The elderly woman's movements were economical and graceful, each action serving a clear purpose. "I know you must have questions," Elizabeth said, without turning from her work, "about why we brought you here, what we expect from you, what your life will be like among us. But first, you must eat. Questions can wait until your body is cared for." The aroma that began filling the room was unlike anything from Clara's experience. Rich and complex, with unfamiliar spices that made her mouth water despite her nervousness. When Elizabeth finally placed a bowl in front of her, Clara stared at the generous portion with a mixture of hunger and shame. I usually don't eat much," Clara lied, the words automatic after years of her uncle's criticism about her appetite. Elizabeth fixed her with a sharp look. "Child, lying about hunger helps no one. Among our people, sharing food is sacred. When someone offers you nourishment, refusing it dishonors both the giver and the gift." Clara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I just ... I've been told I eat too much, that I'm expensive to feed." "Expensive?" Elizabeth's voice carried a note of outrage. "A person's hunger is not an expense. It is a need to be met with joy. The Creator gave us bodies that require nourishment and providing. That nourishment is one of the ways we show love for each other." The concept was so foreign to Clara's experience that she could barely process it. Food as an expression of love rather than a burden to be rationed. Hunger as a natural need rather than a shameful weakness. "Eat," Elizabeth said firmly. "All of it. And when you are finished, we will talk about why the Creator brought you to us." The food was delicious beyond Clara's expectations. A rich stew with vegetables she couldn't identify and meat that had been cooked with herbs that made every bite a new discovery. As she ate, Elizabeth settled in the chair across from her and began to speak in a conversational tone that somehow made the meal feel like a communion rather than simply feeding. "Joseph told you that we believe the Creator makes each person exactly as they are meant to be," Elizabeth began. "But he may not have explained what we mean by that, or why we think it applies to you." Clara looked up from her bowl, curious despite her nervousness. 3 months ago, Elizabeth continued. Our medicine woman, Sarah Clearwater, had a vision. In this vision, she saw a woman who carried great weight, not just in her body, but in her spirit. This woman had been broken by the cruelty of others, but she possessed gifts that could heal many people. The vision showed that this woman would come to us from the white world, and that helping her discover her gifts would be crucial for our community's survival. Clara nearly choked on her stew. You think I'm this woman from the vision? I know you are, Elizabeth said with calm certainty. When our scout brought word about the auction, Sarah Clearwater confirmed that you matched what she had seen. The weight you carry, the sadness in your spirit, the way you had been cast out by your own people, everything fit. But I don't have any gifts, Clara protested. I'm slow and clumsy and useless for fine work. I can barely take care of myself, let alone help anyone else. Elizabeth smiled, the expression both patient and knowing. Child, you have spent so many years being told what you cannot do that you have forgotten to discover what you can do. Tomorrow we will begin to find out. After Clara finished eating, every bite, as Elizabeth had insisted, the elderly woman showed her to a small but comfortable room connected to the main house. The bed was large and sturdy, covered with beautiful quilts that looked handmade. A wash basin and clean towels waited on a wooden stand, along with what appeared to be a nightgown in a size that would actually fit Clara's massive frame. How did you know my size? Clara asked, amazed. We are practical people, Elizabeth replied simply. When we decided to help you, we prepared for your needs. As Clara prepared for sleep and privacy and comfort she hadn't experienced in years, she reflected on the overwhelming strangeness of the day. This morning she had been property sold at auction. Tonight she was a welcomed guest in the home of a Cherokee elder who spoke of visions and gifts and purposes she couldn't imagine. But exhaustion overwhelmed confusion, and Clara fell into the deepest sleep she had experienced since childhood. She woke before dawn to the sound of voices outside her window. Through the thin walls, she could hear what sounded like an argument in Cherokee, voices raised in what seemed to be disagreement or concern. Clara lay still, straining to understand, but the rapid flow of unfamiliar words gave her no clues about the discussion's content. A knock on her door interrupted her speculation. Clara? Elizabeth's voice called softly. Are you awake? Yes, Clara replied, quickly pulling on the dress she had worn yesterday. Elizabeth entered carrying a tray with breakfast and wearing an expression that mixed determination with concern. We need to talk about today, she said, setting the tray on a small table. There are some things you should understand about our situation here. As Clara ate breakfast, again, Elizabeth insisted she finish everything. The elderly woman explained that the Cherokee community was facing challenges Clara had never imagined. The federal government's removal policies had officially ended years ago, but pressure to relocate remained constant. Local white settlers resented the Cherokee presence and regularly petitioned territorial authorities to force them out. Even friendly relations with white neighbors were complicated by mutual suspicion and cultural misunderstandings. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked, though she suspected she might not like the answer. Because your presence here will be seen as significant by both our people and yours, Elizabeth explained. Some in our community worry that harboring a white woman will give the government excuse to claim we are kidnapping white people. Some of your people will be angry that we stole you from the auction, even though we paid fairly for your freedom. Clara felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. Once again, her very existence was causing problems for people trying to help her. I should leave, she said quietly. I should go somewhere else so I don't bring trouble to your people. Elizabeth's response was swift and sharp. Absolutely not. Running from challenges solves nothing. Besides, the vision made clear that your presence here serves a purpose beyond your own welfare. Before Clara could ask what that meant, another knock interrupted them. Joseph's voice called from outside, asking permission to enter. "Come," Elizabeth replied, and Joseph stepped into the room carrying what appeared to be Cherokee clothing in Clara's size. "Good morning," he said, his manner formal but warm. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you," Clara replied, still amazed that anyone cared about her comfort. "We have prepared clothing that will be more suitable for the work ahead," Joseph continued, indicating the bundle he carried. "And we need to discuss your role in our community." The Cherokee clothing was beautiful, a long dress of soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork, along with leggings and moccasins that looked both practical and elegant. Clara had never owned anything so fine, and she handled the garments with reverent care. "This is too beautiful for someone like me," she protested. "Someone like you?" Joseph's eyebrows rose. "What does that mean?" Clara gestured helplessly at herself. "Look at me. I'm huge and ugly and clumsy. These clothes are for someone graceful and elegant." Joseph and Elizabeth exchanged a look that Clara couldn't interpret. Then Joseph spoke with quiet intensity. "Clara, among our people, beauty is not measured by size or shape. Beauty comes from the spirit within, from kindness and courage and wisdom. These clothes were made for you specifically because you deserve to be dressed with honor." As Clara changed into the Cherokee clothing with Elizabeth's help, she caught sight of herself in the elderly woman's mirror. The transformation was startling. The beautifully crafted dress, designed to flatter rather than hide her figure, made her look dignified rather than shameful. The rich brown color brought out highlights in her hair, and the intricate beadwork drew attention to the garment's artistry rather than her size. "You look beautiful," Elizabeth said simply, and Clara realized it was the first time anyone had ever said those words to her. When they emerged from the house, Clara found a group of Cherokee women waiting outside. Their faces showed curiosity and welcome, but also something that might have been speculation or evaluation. Joseph made introductions, though Clara immediately forgot most of the names in her nervousness. But one woman stood out, Sarah Clearwater, the medicine woman who had supposedly seen Clara in a vision. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "So," Sarah said, studying Clara with uncomfortable intensity, "you are the one from my dreams." I guess so," Clara stammered. "Though I still don't understand what that means." Sarah smiled mysteriously. "Today we will begin to find out. There is work to be done, and we will see what gifts you bring to it." What followed was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. Instead of being assigned menial labor or kitchen duty as she had expected, she found herself included in what seemed to be important community activities. The Cherokee women were preparing for what they called the Green Corn Ceremony, a significant religious and social event that required extensive preparation. But rather than giving Clara simple tasks appropriate for an outsider, they began testing her abilities in ways that seemed almost ritualistic. They asked her to help move heavy stones for a ceremonial fire circle, and discovered that her size gave her strength that even Cherokee men respected. They asked her to help prepare large quantities of food, and found that her experience feeding her uncle's hired workers had given her skills in large-scale cooking that impressed even experienced cooks. Most surprisingly, when they asked her to help with intricate beadwork, expecting her large hands to be clumsy with such delicate work, they discovered that she had a natural talent for detailed handiwork that left the other women amazed. "How did you learn to do this?" asked one woman, examining Clara's surprisingly elegant beadwork. "I didn't learn it," Clara replied, confused by her own unexpected skill. "I've never done anything like this before. It just feels right." As the day progressed, Clara began to understand what the Cherokee women were doing. They weren't just including her in their work, they were systematically discovering her capabilities, testing her skills, evaluating what she might contribute to their community. But the most surprising discovery came late in the afternoon, when a crisis interrupted their preparations. A Cherokee scout arrived with urgent news. A group of white settlers was approaching the village, armed and apparently hostile. The men had been drinking and were making threats about teaching the savages a lesson for harboring a white woman. As the Cherokee men prepared to defend their community, Clara found herself facing the first real test of her place among these people. The settlers were coming because of her presence. The violence that might follow would be her fault, but instead of the familiar shame and helplessness she expected to feel, Clara experienced something new, a burning anger at the injustice of it all, and a fierce determination to protect the people who had shown her kindness. "What can I do to help?" she asked Joseph, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Joseph looked at her with something that might have been approval. "That depends," he said. "Are you willing to face danger? To protect people who have become family to you?" Clara thought about Elizabeth's kindness, about the Cherokee women who had welcomed her, about the children who had looked at her with curiosity rather than cruelty. These people had given her more respect and dignity in one day than she had received in years from her own people. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Whatever you need me to do." As the sun began to set over the Cherokee village, Clara Whitman prepared for her first real test of belonging. The broken woman who had been sold like cattle was about to discover that sometimes finding your true strength requires defending the people who see your true worth. But she had no idea that the approaching confrontation would reveal not just her courage, but abilities she had never imagined possessing, abilities that would transform her from a rescued victim into an essential guardian of the community that had saved her. The Cherokee village moved with swift, practiced efficiency as word of the approaching threat spread from house to house. Clara watched in amazement as what had seemed like a peaceful community transformed into a coordinated defensive force. Women secured children and valuable items, while men gathered weapons and took positions along strategic points around the village perimeter. But this wasn't the chaotic panic Clara had expected. Instead, it was the calm, methodical response of people who had faced such threats before and survived through preparation and unity. "Clara," Joseph appeared at her side, his face grim but determined. "I need you to understand what we're facing. These men aren't coming for a conversation. They've been drinking and working themselves into a rage about you being here. They see your presence as proof that we're kidnappers or worse." Clara felt her stomach drop. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't come here—" "No," Joseph cut her off sharply. "This is the fault of men who choose violence over understanding. You are not responsible for their hatred." Sarah Clearwater approached them, carrying what appeared to be a leather pouch filled with herbs and other items Clara couldn't identify. The medicine woman's face was serene despite the crisis, as if she possessed knowledge that gave her confidence in the outcome. "The vision is becoming clear," Sarah said cryptically. "Clara, you came here not just to be saved, but to save others. Tonight you will understand what that means." Before Clara could ask for clarification, a shout from one of the Cherokee sentries drew everyone's attention. The hostile settlers had arrived at the edge of the village, their voices loud and belligerent even from a distance. "Where's our woman?" The lead voice was slurred with alcohol but carried clearly in the mountain air. "We know you savages got her hidden somewhere. Hand her over and maybe we won't burn this whole place down." Joseph's jaw tightened with controlled anger. "Stay here," he told Clara. "Whatever happens, don't show yourself until I give the word." As Joseph moved toward the edge of the village to confront the intruders, Clara found herself surrounded by Cherokee women who had positioned themselves as both protectors and observers. Elizabeth took her arm with surprising strength. "You must see this," the elderly woman said firmly. "You must understand what your people become when they let fear and hatred guide them." From their concealed position, Clara could see the group of white settlers clearly. There were 8 of them, all men, all armed, and all showing the aggressive confidence that came from alcohol and mob mentality. She recognized two of them from Millerville, men who had been at the auction, who had bid on her like livestock. Just yesterday, the leader of the group was Buck Morrison, a man Clara knew by reputation as someone who caused trouble whenever he had too much to drink. He owned a small farm outside Millerville and was known for his loud opinions about Indians and his belief that they had no right to any land in Tennessee. "Chief," Morrison called out mockingly as Joseph approached with several Cherokee warriors. "We're here for that white woman you stole from the auction. Hand her over peaceful-like, and we'll be on our way." Joseph's response was calm, but carried clearly across the distance. "No one here was stolen. The woman you speak of came freely, and she is under our protection." "Protection?" Morrison laughed harshly. "From what? From honest white folks who paid good money for her? You people got no right to interfere with white business." Clara felt Elizabeth's grip tighten on her arm as Joseph replied with dignity intact. "We paid the winning bid fairly, as witnessed by many people. Our business was conducted legally, according to your own customs." "Legal maybe, but not right," shouted another man. "White women don't belong with savages. You probably got her tied up somewhere, doing God knows what heathen rituals." The crude accusations made Clara's face burn with shame and anger. These men were describing her as if she were a helpless victim rather than a person who had made her own choice to stay with. People who treated her with respect. "You have 1 minute to produce her," Morrison declared, his hand moving to the rifle at his side. "After that, we start searching houses, and we might not be too careful about what else we find." Clara felt something shift inside her chest. A burning anger unlike anything she had ever experienced. These men were threatening people who had shown her more kindness in one day than her own family had shown in years. They were prepared to use violence against children and elders to satisfy their prejudices and wounded pride. Without conscious decision, Clara found herself stepping forward. "Clara, no!" Elizabeth hissed, trying to pull her back, but Clara gently freed herself from the elderly woman's grasp. For the first time in her life, she was not going to hide from a confrontation. She was not going to let good people suffer because of her presence. Clara walked slowly but deliberately toward the edge of the village, her Cherokee dress rustling softly in the evening air. When she emerged from the shadows into the firelight, where the two groups faced each other, a shocked silence fell over the scene. Morrison and his men stared at her with expressions ranging from surprise to disgust. But Clara noticed something else in their faces: uncertainty. They had expected to find a cowering victim, not a woman walking toward them with her head held high and dignity in her bearing. "I'm Clara Whitman," she said, her voice carrying farther than she had intended. "I believe you're looking for me." Morrison recovered his bluster quickly. "Well, there you are. Come on over here, girl. We're taking you back where you belong." "No," Clara said simply. "I belong here." The flat refusal caught Morrison off guard. "What do you mean, no?" "You're coming with us whether you like it or not. These savages probably got you under some kind of spell or something." Clara felt a strange calm settling over her. Looking at these men, drunk, violent, treating her rescue as if it were theft, she realized something that changed everything. She was no longer afraid of them. "Mr. Morrison," she said, recognizing him despite his condition, "you were at the auction yesterday. You heard my uncle sell me like cattle to pay his gambling debts. You watched it happen and said nothing." Morrison's face reddened. "That's different. That was legal. This is kidnapping." "This is kindness," Clara replied firmly. "These people paid for my freedom and offered me a home. They've treated me with more respect in one day than I received in years from my own family." "Respect?" "One of the other men laughed crudely. "Is that what they call it? We know what savages do with white women." The insult hit Clara like a physical blow, but not because it hurt her feelings. Instead, it crystallized everything that was wrong with the situation. These men saw her only as property to be claimed or rescued. They couldn't conceive that she might have agency in her own life, or that Cherokee people might be capable of genuine kindness. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice growing stronger. "These people have shown me what it means to be treated as a human being rather than as a burden or an object. They fed me without complaint, clothed me with honor, and welcomed me as family. That's something none of you have ever done." Joseph stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. "You have your answer," he said to Morrison. "The woman chooses to stay. Your business here is finished." Morrison's face twisted with rage. "Like hell it is. You think we're just gonna ride away and let you keep her? She's been bewitched or threatened. Or something. White women don't choose to live with Indians." "This one does," Clara said firmly. The confrontation might have escalated into violence at that point, but something unexpected happened. Sarah Clearwater stepped forward, moving with the measured pace of someone performing a ritual. She began speaking in Cherokee, her voice rising and falling in what sounded like a ceremonial chant. Morrison and his men shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with what they perceived as Indian magic or religion. But Clara, watching Sarah's face, realized that the medicine woman was doing something more complex than simple intimidation. As Sarah continued her chant, other Cherokee women began to emerge from the shadows, forming a protective circle around Clara. They moved with synchronized precision, as if this were a ceremony they had performed many times before. "What are they doing?" one of Morrison's men asked nervously. "Probably cursing us or something," another replied, his earlier bravado fading. But Elizabeth, standing beside Clara now, provided a translation that revealed the truth. "She's asking the spirits to witness that Clara came here freely, that she chooses to stay freely, and that any violence against our community would be an attack on an innocent person under our protection." The ritual continued for several minutes, with more Cherokee people joining the circle until Clara found herself at the center of what had become a community-wide declaration of protection and acceptance. Men, women, children, and elders all participated, their voices joining Sarah's in harmonies that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. Morrison and his men found themselves facing not just a few Cherokee warriors, but an entire community, united in defense of someone they had claimed as their own. The psychological impact was profound. These drunk, angry men had expected to intimidate a handful of savages, but instead found themselves confronting a dignified, organized people acting with moral authority. "This is witchcraft," Morrison declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is family," Joseph replied calmly. "Something you clearly don't understand." The ceremony reached its climax when Sarah approached Clara directly, placing a beautiful necklace of silver and turquoise around her neck. The jewelry was clearly significant. Older Cherokee people nodded with approval, and Clara could sense that she was being marked as truly belonging to the community. "You are no longer Clara Whitman of the white world," Sarah announced in English, ensuring the hostile settlers could understand. "You are Clara Bear Heart of the Cherokee people, adopted daughter of this clan, sister to our warriors, protector of our children." The name hit Clara like lightning. Bear Heart. Strong, protective, fierce when defending family. It was everything she had never thought she could be. Morrison and his men found themselves in an impossible position. They had come to rescue what they saw as a kidnapped white woman, but that woman had publicly chosen her captors over them. More importantly, she had been formally adopted into the Cherokee community through what was obviously a sacred ceremony. "You're all crazy," Morrison muttered, but he was already backing away. "This ain't over. The territorial government's gotta hear about this. There'll be soldiers coming to investigate." "Let them come," Joseph replied. "They will find a woman living freely among people who honor her, not a victim of kidnapping." As Morrison's group retreated into the darkness, Clara felt a transformation completing itself inside her. The broken woman who had stood on an auction block yesterday morning was gone forever. In her place stood Clara Bearheart, adopted Cherokee, defender of the community that had seen her worth when her own people had seen only burden. But as the immediate crisis passed, and the Cherokee people began to celebrate her formal adoption into their clan, Clara had no idea that her real challenges were just beginning. The government investigation Morrison had threatened would bring federal agents and territorial officials who would question everything about her presence in Cherokee territory. More importantly, her own internal journey was far from complete. Changing her name and clothing was easy compared to the deeper work of healing from years of abuse and learning to see herself as the Cherokee people saw her, not as a burden to be endured, but as a gift to be treasured. The auction block was behind her, but the real work of building her new life was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Clara's adoption ceremony, and the Cherokee village had settled into a new rhythm that included their unusual new member. But while Clara Bearheart had found acceptance within the community, she was still struggling with the deeper work of accepting herself. Each morning, she woke in Elizabeth's comfortable home, dressed in beautiful Cherokee clothing, and participated in the daily life of people who valued her contributions. Yet each morning, she also caught glimpses of herself in Elizabeth's mirror and felt the familiar surge of shame about her size. "You're frowning again," Elizabeth observed as Clara helped prepare breakfast. The elderly woman had developed an uncanny ability to read Clara's moods and thoughts. "I'm sorry," Clara said automatically, the apology reflexive after years of trying to minimize her presence. "Sorry for what? For having feelings? For being human?" Elizabeth's voice carried gentle exasperation. "Clara Bearheart, you have been with us nearly a month, and you still apologize for existing." Clara focused on cutting vegetables, using the precise knife work that had impressed the Cherokee women. "I'm trying to change, I really am. But sometimes I look at myself and remember what I was before, what people said about me." Elizabeth set down her own knife and turned to face Clara directly. "What people?" "Your uncle who sold you like livestock. The men at the auction who bid on you as if you were property. The townspeople who watched your humiliation and did nothing to help." The sharp summary of Clara's past treatment made her wince. "They weren't all wrong. I am enormous. I do eat more than most people. I am clumsy sometimes. And you are also strong enough to move stones that 3 men couldn't lift," Elizabeth countered. "You cook with the skill of someone who has fed crowds. You work with beads so precisely that our finest craftswomen ask for your help. You stood up to 8 armed men to protect people you had known for one day." Clara felt tears threatening. "But if I were normal-sized, if I were pretty like other women, then you would be someone else entirely," Elizabeth interrupted firmly. "And we don't need someone else. We need you exactly as you are." Their conversation was interrupted by Joseph's arrival, his face showing the kind of controlled concern that usually meant serious news. "Good morning," he said, accepting the coffee Elizabeth offered. "Clara, I need to speak with you about something important." Clara's stomach immediately clenched with familiar dread. In her experience, important conversations usually meant bad news. "Buck Morrison made good on his threat," Joseph continued. "Federal agents arrived in Millerville yesterday, asking questions about a kidnapped white woman. They'll be here within a few days to investigate your situation." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "They're going to take me back. Not if you don't want to go," Joseph said firmly. "But we need to prepare you for what they'll ask, how they'll try to manipulate the situation." Over the next hour, Joseph explained what Clara could expect from the federal investigation. The agents would arrive with preconceived notions about Cherokee people and their treatment of white captives. They would assume she had been coerced or threatened into staying. They would look for signs of abuse, evidence of Stockholm Syndrome, proof that she was being held against her will. "They won't believe that I chose this," Clara said, understanding the situation's complexity. No, Joseph agreed. They won't believe that a white woman would voluntarily choose to live among Cherokee people, especially not a woman who could have been rescued by her own people. Sarah Clearwater, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. There is something else they will not understand, something that makes Clara's situation unique. Clara looked at the medicine woman with curiosity and growing apprehension. The vision that led us to Clara showed more than just her arrival, Sarah continued. It showed her purpose here, the reason the Creator brought us together. But this purpose cannot be fulfilled if she is taken away by government agents. What purpose? Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Our community faces a crisis that goes beyond government harassment or land disputes. There is sickness coming, a disease that will threaten our children. The vision showed that Clara Bare Heart would be the key to saving them. The prediction sent chills through Clara's body. I don't know anything about medicine. I can't heal people. Not with herbs or ceremonies, Sarah agreed, but with something more powerful. The vision showed you standing between our children and death itself, your size and strength becoming a shield that protects them. Elizabeth nodded as if this made perfect sense. The Creator gave you your size for a reason, child. Perhaps that reason is becoming clear. Before Clara could process this mystical revelation, a commotion outside drew their attention. A Cherokee scout had arrived with urgent news. The federal agents weren't waiting for a formal investigation. They were already en route to the village, with a territorial marshal and a squad of soldiers. How long do we have? Joseph asked. Maybe 2 hours, the scout replied. They're moving fast, and they look determined. Joseph's face hardened with decision. Clara, you need to decide right now. Do you want to stay with us and face whatever comes? Or do you want us to help you disappear into the mountains until this passes? The choice was stark and immediate. Stay and risk being forced back to her old life, or run and live as a fugitive in the wilderness. Clara thought about the woman who had stood on the auction block just a month ago, broken, desperate, ready to accept any fate because she had no hope for anything better. Then she thought about the woman she had become, Clara Bare Heart, adopted Cherokee, someone who had found family and purpose among people who valued her exactly as she was. I stay, she said firmly. Whatever happens, I belong here now. Elizabeth smiled with profound satisfaction. Good. Then we prepare for battle. What followed was unlike any preparation Clara had ever witnessed. This wasn't the frantic activity of people trying to hide evidence or create false stories. Instead, it was the calm, methodical preparation of people who intended to tell the truth and face the consequences. Cherokee women began gathering documentation. Trade records showing Clara's purchase at auction, witness statements from people who had seen her treatment by her uncle, letters from Millerville residents who could testify to her voluntary participation in Cherokee life. Men prepared the ceremonial grounds where Clara's adoption had taken place, ensuring that everything was arranged to show the sacred nature of her incorporation into the tribe. Children practiced their English, so they could serve as translators and witnesses to Clara's treatment within the community. But most importantly, Sarah Clearwater began preparing Clara herself for the confrontation ahead. They will try to convince you that you are a victim, the medicine woman explained as she applied traditional Cherokee face paint to Clara's cheeks. They will say that you have been brainwashed, that you don't understand your own situation. Huh. Do I prove that I'm here by choice? Clara asked. By being exactly who you have become, Sarah replied. Clara Bare Heart doesn't apologize for existing. She doesn't hide from confrontation. She protects her family. As the federal agents approached the village, Clara found herself thinking about identity and transformation. A month ago, she had been a commodity sold to the highest bidder. Today, She was a Cherokee woman preparing to defend her right to choose her own life. The transformation wasn't just external, in clothing and name and community, but internal. She had stopped seeing herself through the eyes of people who considered her worthless and started seeing herself through the eyes of people who considered her precious. When the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of the federal investigation team, Clara Bearheart stood ready to face them. Not as a victim to be rescued, but as a Cherokee woman defending her home and family. The agents who dismounted in the village center looked exactly as Joseph had predicted: stern, suspicious men who clearly expected to find evidence of kidnapping and coercion. They were led by a federal marshal named Coleman, a thin man with cold eyes who surveyed the Cherokee village with obvious disdain. "I'm looking for a white woman named Clara Whitman," he announced without preamble. "We have reports that she's being held here against her will." Clara stepped forward, her Cherokee dress rustling softly, the silver and turquoise necklace catching the afternoon light. "I am Clara Bearheart," she said clearly, "formerly Clara Whitman." Marshal Coleman's eyes widened as he took in her appearance, her size, her Cherokee clothing, her confident bearing. This was clearly not what he had expected to find. "Miss Whitman," he said, apparently deciding to ignore her Cherokee name, "we're here to investigate reports of your kidnapping. Are you being held against your will?" "No," Clara replied simply. "I live here by choice." "Choice?" Coleman's voice carried skepticism. "Ma'am, you were purchased at auction by these Indians. That's not a choice. That's human trafficking." Clara felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I was sold at auction by my uncle to pay his gambling debts. Chief Strong Beer paid the winning bid and immediately offered me freedom and protection. I chose to accept his offer." "Stockholm Syndrome," one of the other agents muttered. "Classic case of a victim identifying with her captors." The casual dismissal of her agency and intelligence sparked something fierce in Clara's chest. "I am not a victim," she said, her voice carrying across the village. "For the first time in my life, I am free." As the investigation continued, Clara realized that this confrontation would determine not just her immediate future, but the kind of woman she was going to be for the rest of her life. Would she allow these men to convince her that her choices were invalid, that her happiness was an illusion? Or would she stand firm in the truth of her transformation? The broken woman who had been sold like cattle was gone forever. In her place stood Clara Bearheart, Cherokee warrior, ready to fight for the life she had chosen and the family that had chosen her. But the real battle was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than anyone yet realized. Marshal Coleman circled Clara like a predator studying prey, his cold eyes cataloging every detail of her appearance and demeanor. Behind him, 2 federal agents took notes while territorial soldiers maintained threatening positions around the Cherokee village. "Miss Whitman," Coleman began, deliberately using her former name, "I need you to answer some very specific questions. And I need you to understand that lying to a federal officer is a serious crime." Clara felt the familiar urge to shrink away, to make herself smaller and less noticeable. But the weight of the Cherokee necklace around her neck reminded her of who she had become. Clara Bearheart did not cower before bullies. "Ask your questions," she replied steadily. "Have you been physically harmed or threatened by any member of this Cherokee community?" "No." "Have you been forced to participate in any religious ceremonies or rituals against your will?" Clara thought about her adoption ceremony, the overwhelming feeling of belonging she had experienced. "No, I participated freely in a ceremony that welcomed me as family." Coleman's expression showed he didn't believe her. "Have you been given adequate food, shelter, and clothing?" "More than adequate," Clara replied. "I've been treated with kindness and respect." One of the federal agents leaned forward. "Ma'am, we understand that captivity can create psychological bonds with captors. It's not uncommon for kidnapping victims to defend their abductors. You don't need to protect these people. The condescending tone ignited Clara's anger. I'm not protecting anyone. I'm telling the truth about my experiences. The truth? Coleman's voice dripped skepticism. The truth is that you were purchased at a legal auction by white bidders, then stolen by these Indians before the transaction could be completed. That's not what happened, Clara said firmly. Chief Strongbeer was the highest bidder. He won the auction fairly. Indians can't legally purchase white people, Coleman declared. Any such transaction is automatically invalid. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Joseph, who had been standing quietly nearby, stepped forward. Marshal, are you saying that Cherokee money is not valid for legal transactions in Tennessee? Coleman's face reddened. I'm saying that certain types of transactions require oversight to prevent exploitation. Whose exploitation? Joseph asked calmly. The woman who was being sold like livestock by her own family, or the people who offered her protection and dignity? Don't twist this around, Coleman snapped. We have reports of Indian uprisings, of white women being taken for God knows what purposes. This woman needs to be returned to proper authorities for her own safety. Clara felt something crystallize inside her chest. These men weren't here to investigate her welfare. They were here to validate their own prejudices about Cherokee people and white women's supposed helplessness. What proper authorities? She asked, her voice growing stronger. My uncle who sold me to pay gambling debts. The townspeople who watched it happen and did nothing. The men who bid on me like I was livestock. Civilized society, Coleman replied. Stiffly, people who understand your true worth and can provide appropriate care. You want to know my true worth? Clara stood to her full height, her massive frame commanding attention. For 26 years, civilized society told me I was worthless. Too big, too slow, too hungry, too sad. A burden to be tolerated at best. She gestured toward the Cherokee people gathered around them. These people looked at me and saw strength. They saw someone capable of protecting children, of creating beauty, of contributing to their community. Which society do you think understands my true worth? Before Coleman could respond, a commotion at the edge of the village drew everyone's attention. A Cherokee runner had arrived, speaking rapidly in their native language to Joseph. The chief's face grew grave as he listened. What's happening? Coleman demanded. Joseph was quiet for a moment, then spoke with careful control. There's been an outbreak of illness in the white settlement of Oak Ridge, about 15 miles south of here. Children are dying of what appears to be diphtheria. The news sent a chill through Clara's body. Sarah's vision had predicted disease threatening children, but Clara had assumed it meant Cherokee children. Sarah Clearwater stepped forward, her face showing the intense focus that came when her prophetic abilities were activated. The sickness will spread, she announced. It will reach Cherokee children within days unless we act quickly. What does this have to do with our investigation? Coleman asked irritably. Everything, Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on Clara. The vision that brought Clara Bearheart to us showed her standing between our children and death. This is the moment we have been preparing for. Coleman looked around the gathered Cherokee people with obvious disgust. You people and your superstitions. We're not here to listen to fortune-telling. But Clara was listening with growing understanding. Her size, her strength, her experiences, everything that had made her seem worthless in white society might be exactly what was needed to save lives. What did the vision show specifically? She asked Sarah. The medicine woman's eyes took on the unfocused look that indicated she was accessing prophetic knowledge. Sick children in a place of healing. Someone with great physical strength carrying them to safety when others could not. A woman whose size allowed her to care for many at once, whose gentleness came from knowing suffering. A hospital, Clara breathed, understanding flooding through her. They need someone strong enough to lift and carry sick children, gentle enough not to frighten them, experienced enough with suffering to comfort them. Joseph nodded slowly. The white settlement has no proper medical facilities, no one trained in caring for seriously ill children. If the disease spreads to our community, we'll lose children in both communities, Clara finished. Unless someone bridges that gap. Coleman had been listening to this exchange with growing impatience. This is exactly the kind of primitive thinking we need to protect you from, he told Clara. Disease requires medical treatment, not Indian mysticism. You're right about medical treatment, Clara agreed. But medical treatment requires someone who can provide physical care when doctors aren't available. Someone who can lift sick children without tiring, who can stay awake for days nursing them, who has the emotional strength to comfort families facing loss. She turned to Joseph. I want to help. Absolutely not, Coleman interjected. I'm not allowing a kidnapped white woman to risk her life on some Indian rescue mission. I'm not kidnapped, Clara said, her voice carrying new authority. I'm a Cherokee woman offering to help save children's lives. You're a confused victim suffering from psychological manipulation, Coleman replied. And I'm taking you into federal custody for your own protection. The marshal gestured to his soldiers. But before they could move, something unexpected happened. A group of Cherokee warriors stepped forward, positioning themselves protectively around Clara, not threateningly, but with the quiet determination of people prepared to defend family. You will not take her, Joseph said calmly. Clara Bearheart is a member of our tribe, adopted through sacred ceremony. Any attempt to remove her against her will would be an act of war against the Cherokee Nation. Coleman's hand moved to his weapon. Are you threatening federal agents? I'm explaining Cherokee law, Joseph replied. Just as you explained federal law. Clara Bearheart has been legally adopted into our tribe through ceremonies recognized by previous treaties. She has the right to choose where she lives and how she serves her community. The standoff might have escalated into violence, but Clara stepped forward, placing herself between the two groups. Stop, she said firmly. This isn't about jurisdiction or law or who has the right to make decisions for me. This is about children dying while adults argue. She turned to face Coleman directly. Marshal, you said you're here to investigate my welfare. My welfare depends on being able to live with purpose, to use my abilities to help others, to be part of a community that values what I can contribute. Taking me away from that doesn't protect me, it destroys me. Your abilities? Coleman's voice carried derision. What abilities could you possibly have that qualified medical professionals don't? Clara felt the weight of a lifetime's shame pressing down on her, but also the strength of Cherokee acceptance lifting her up. I'm strong enough to carry multiple sick children at once. I'm large enough to hold several babies against my body to keep them warm when fever breaks. I've experienced enough suffering to comfort families in crisis without breaking down myself. She paused, then added quietly, and I've learned to see past what people look like to who they really are inside. Sick children don't care that I'm not pretty, they just need someone who can help them survive. Elizabeth stepped forward, her aged voice carrying the authority of wisdom. Marshal Coleman, you speak of protecting this woman. But protection means allowing someone to become who they were meant to be, not forcing them to remain what others expect them to be. As if summoned by the power of Clara's conviction, another Cherokee runner arrived with more urgent news. The disease outbreak was spreading faster than expected. 3 children had died in Oak Ridge, and 2 Cherokee families living near the white settlement were reporting symptoms. We're out of time, Sarah announced. The sickness reaches our village tonight unless someone acts now. Clara looked around at the faces surrounding her, Cherokee people who had become family, federal agents who saw her as property to be claimed, soldiers ready to use force to impose their will. The choice was stark and immediate. She could allow herself to be taken into federal custody, returning to a society that had never valued her, losing the chance to save lives and fulfill the purpose she had finally discovered. Or she could stand firm in her identity as Clara Bearheart, Cherokee woman, and face whatever consequences came from choosing her own destiny. The broken woman who had been sold like cattle was gone forever. In her place stood someone ready to risk everything to protect the children who needed her strength. "I'm going to Oak Ridge," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the tense gathering, "with or without official permission. Children are dying, and I have the ability to help save them." Marshal Coleman's face darkened with fury. "If you leave this village, you'll be considered a fugitive from federal custody." Clara Bearheart smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "Then I guess you'll have to catch me." As she turned toward the Cherokee horses, preparing for the most important journey of her life, Clara realized that sometimes finding your true purpose requires risking everything you've gained. But she also knew that the woman who had learned to see her own worth was finally ready to show the world what she could accomplish. The real test of her transformation was about to begin. The ride to Oak Ridge was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. Joseph had chosen Thunder, his strongest horse, to carry her, while a small group of Cherokee warriors accompanied them through the mountain passes. Behind them, federal agents followed at a distance, unwilling to abandon their investigation, but also unwilling to prevent what might be a humanitarian mission. As they crested the final ridge before the white settlement, the scope of the crisis became horrifyingly clear. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, but not the comfortable smoke of cooking fires. This was the thick, medicinal smoke of burning herbs and the desperate attempts to purify air that carried death. "Dear God," Clara whispered, taking in the scene below. Oak Ridge was a modest settlement of perhaps 50 families, but even from a distance, the signs of catastrophe were evident. Makeshift quarantine flags hung from several houses, and Clara could see people moving with the hurried, desperate energy of a community in crisis. Joseph pulled his horse alongside hers. "Are you certain about this? Once we enter that settlement, you'll be exposed to the same disease that's killing their children." Clara thought about the comfortable safety of the Cherokee village, the warm acceptance she had found there, the life she would be risking. Then she thought about Sarah's vision, children depending on her strength, her unique ability to provide care that no one else could give. "I'm certain," she said firmly. The group descended into Oak Ridge to find chaos. The settlement's only doctor, an elderly man named Phillips, was overwhelmed by the number of cases. Families with sick children clustered around his small clinic, begging for help he simply couldn't provide fast enough. Dr. Phillips himself looked exhausted beyond endurance, his clothes stained with the evidence of desperate medical battles. When he saw the Cherokee group approaching, his face showed a mixture of hope and suspicion. "We heard about the disease," Joseph called out as they dismounted. "We've come to offer help." "Indians?" Phillips looked confused. "Why would you help?" "U.S.?" Clara stepped forward, her Cherokee dress and silver necklace marking her as part of Joseph's group despite her white features. "Because children are dying, and I have skills that might save them." Phillips studied her massive frame with the calculating eye of a medical professional. "What kind of skills?" "I'm strong enough to move patients safely, experienced in caring for large numbers of people, and ... Clara hesitated, then continued with quiet confidence. "I'm not afraid of hard work or suffering." A woman emerged from the clinic, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. "Doctor, please. My baby is burning up with fever, and Mary's boy just stopped breathing." The desperation in her voice cut through any diplomatic considerations. Clara moved toward the clinic without waiting for permission, her instincts taking over. Inside the small building, the sight that greeted her was heartbreaking. Sick children filled every available space, on beds, on makeshift pallets on the floor, some held by mothers too exhausted to continue caring for them properly. The air was thick with the smell of fever and fear, but Clara also saw something, that the overwhelmed adults had missed opportunities for better organization, ways to use space more efficiently, methods for providing care that could help more children simultaneously. "Dr. Phillips," she said, her voice carrying new authority, "how many children are currently critical?" 7, maybe 8, he replied, surprised by her businesslike tone. "But I can only attend to one at a time, and what if you could attend to one while I manage the others?" Clara interrupted. "I can monitor multiple patients simultaneously, provide physical comfort, administer simple treatments under your direction." Phillips looked skeptical. "You have medical training?" "I have common sense and strength," Clara replied. "And right now, those might be more valuable than formal training." To demonstrate her point, Clara moved to where 3 feverish children lay on a single bed, their mothers too exhausted to continue the constant cooling treatments that might break their fevers. With gentle efficiency, she repositioned the children to maximize air circulation, then began the methodical process of cooling their bodies with damp cloths. But what amazed the watching parents was Clara's technique. Her large hands, which had always seemed clumsy in delicate situations, proved perfect for the broad, soothing strokes needed to comfort sick children. Her substantial arms could support multiple patients at once, and her size allowed her to create a sense of protective shelter around the sickest cases. Within an hour, Clara had reorganized the entire clinic. Children were grouped by severity of illness, with the most critical cases positioned where both she and Dr. Phillips could attend to them quickly. Less critical patients were arranged so Clara could monitor them while providing hands-on care to the sickest. Most importantly, she had created a system that allowed Dr. Phillips to focus on medical decisions while she handled the physical care. "That was exhausting him. How did you learn to do this?" asked one of the mothers, watching Clara simultaneously cool 3 children's fevers while monitoring the breathing of 2 others. "I learned to see what needs to be done and do it," Clara replied simply. "And I learned that sometimes being different means being exactly what someone needs." As the day progressed, word of Clara's effectiveness spread through the settlement. Parents who had been turned away from the overcrowded clinic began bringing their sick children, trusting that this unusual Cherokee woman might be able to help where others couldn't. But it was late afternoon when Clara's unique abilities were truly tested. A family arrived carrying a little girl who was barely breathing, her fever so high that she was convulsing. Dr. Phillips took one look and shook his head grimly. "I can't save her," he said quietly. "She's too far gone, and I need to focus on children who have a chance." The mother's anguished cry cut through Clara's heart. Without hesitation, she gathered the dying child into her arms, her large body creating a cocoon of warmth and protection. "What are you doing?" Phillips asked. "Something I learned from watching my own mother die," Clara replied, her voice steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "Sometimes healing isn't about medicine. Sometimes it's about making sure someone doesn't die alone." For the next 6 hours, Clara held the little girl against her chest, her substantial body maintaining the child's temperature while her gentle voice provided comfort. She sang Cherokee lullabies Elizabeth had taught her, told stories about brave children who fought illness and won, and simply offered the security of human contact when medical intervention had reached its limits. The other families in the clinic watched in amazement as this massive woman transformed into the most tender caregiver they had ever seen. Her size, which might have frightened healthy children, became a source of comfort for those who were dying. Her strength allowed her to hold patients for hours without tiring, and her own experience with suffering gave her the emotional resilience to provide comfort without breaking down. Just before dawn, the little girl's fever broke. Her breathing steadied, her convulsions stopped, and she opened her eyes for the first time in 2 days. "Mama," she whispered weakly. The mother's sob of relief echoed through the clinic, and Clara felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. Hope, which had been in short supply, began to return. Dr. Phillips stared at Clara with newfound respect. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that. How did you know what to do?" Clara looked down at the recovering child in her arms. "I didn't know. I just felt what she needed and tried to provide it." As word of the little girl's recovery spread, something remarkable happened. The federal agents who had been maintaining their distant surveillance began to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't a kidnapped woman being exploited by Indians. This was a healer whose unique gifts were saving lives. Marshal Coleman approached the clinic as Clara emerged to give fresh water. His expression was thoughtful rather than hostile. "Miss Bearheart," he said, using her Cherokee name for the first time, "what you're doing in there, is exactly what I was meant to do," Clara finished firmly. "This is who I am when I'm allowed to be myself." Coleman was quiet for a moment. "The federal government has policies about white women living with Indian tribes. And the federal government also has policies about saving American children's lives," Clara replied. "Which policy matters more to you right now?" As if to underscore her point, another family arrived with a sick infant, begging for Clara's help. Without waiting for Coleman's response, she took the baby and returned to the clinic. By the end of the week, the crisis had passed. 15 children who would have died received the care they needed to survive. The disease's spread was contained, and both the white settlement and nearby Cherokee families were safe. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the children Clara had saved. It was in how the white community now saw her, the woman they had initially viewed with suspicion and disgust was now regarded as an angel of mercy, who had risked her life to save their children. "You could stay," Dr. Phillips told her as they prepared the final patient for discharge. "The settlement would welcome you. You could establish a proper medical practice here." Clara looked around the clinic that had become her battlefield, where she had discovered abilities she never knew she possessed. Then she thought about the Cherokee village where she had found family and acceptance. "Thank you," she said gently, "but I already know where I belong." As Clara prepared to return to her chosen home, she realized that her journey from auction block to healer was complete. She had proven to herself and to the world that the qualities that made her different also made her valuable. The broken woman who had been sold like cattle had become Clara Bearheart, Cherokee healer, protector of children, living proof that sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths when we find the right place to use them. But she had no idea that her final test was yet to come, or that the government officials who had witnessed her transformation were about to offer her a choice that would determine not just her future, but the future of Cherokee white relations in the entire region. 6 months after the Oak Ridge crisis, Clara Bearheart stood before the Tennessee Territorial Legislature in Nashville, her Cherokee dress and silver jewelry marking her as something unprecedented in the marble halls of government. A white woman who had become genuinely Cherokee, now serving as an official bridge between two worlds. The invitation to address the legislature had come from Governor William Harrison himself, who had heard extraordinary reports about the woman who had saved an entire settlement from disease, while challenging every assumption about race, identity, and belonging in the American frontier. "Honorable representatives," Clara began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber that had never heard words like the ones she was about to speak. "6 months ago, I stood on an auction block in Millerville, being sold like livestock to pay my uncle's gambling debts. Today, I stand before you as Clara Bearheart, adopted Cherokee, territorial medical coordinator, and living proof that human worth cannot be measured by the standards we think we understand." The assembled legislators, men who had spent their careers creating policies about Indian removal, white settlement, and territorial expansion, listened with expressions ranging from fascination to discomfort as Clara recounted her transformation. But this wasn't simply a personal testimony. Clara had been invited to Nashville to present a revolutionary proposal that could reshape Cherokee-white relations throughout the Southeast. "The crisis in Oak Ridge taught us something crucial," Clara continued. "When children are dying, when communities face real threats, the differences that seem so important in peacetime become irrelevant." Cherokee knowledge of herbal medicine, combined with white medical techniques, saved more lives than either approach could have saved alone. Behind her, carefully arranged displays showed the evidence of what had become known as the Oak Ridge model, integrated medical practices that drew on both Cherokee traditional healing and formal medical training. The results spoke for themselves. Dramatically reduced infant mortality, faster recovery times, and most importantly, proof that cooperation worked better than conflict. "What we propose," Clara said, gesturing toward Joseph Strongbeer, who sat in the gallery as the official Cherokee representative, "is a permanent medical cooperation agreement between Cherokee communities and white settlements throughout Tennessee Territory." The proposal was radical for its time. Instead of the forced assimilation or removal that characterized most Indian policy, Clara and Joseph were suggesting voluntary partnership based on mutual benefit. Cherokee healers would work alongside white doctors. Cherokee communities would share their agricultural innovations with white farmers, and both groups would benefit from each other's knowledge and skills. But the most revolutionary aspect of the proposal centered on Clara herself. "I request official recognition as a dual citizen," she announced, the words sending murmurs through the chamber. "Cherokee by adoption and choice, American by birth and law. I want to serve as the first official cultural liaison between Cherokee and white communities with legal authority to negotiate medical emergencies, trade disputes, and cultural exchanges." The position Clara was requesting had never existed before. She was asking the territorial government to officially recognize that someone could belong to both worlds simultaneously. That identity wasn't a zero-sum game where choosing one culture meant rejecting another. Governor Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Miss Bearhart, what you're proposing would set a precedent that could affect Indian policy across the entire continent. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Clara thought about the woman who had stood on that auction block, broken and hopeless, convinced she was worthless. Then she thought about the woman she had become, someone who had saved children's lives, built bridges between communities, and discovered strength in the very qualities that had once made her feel worthless. "Governor Harrison," she replied, "I've learned that sometimes the most important responsibilities are the ones we never expected to carry. 6 months ago, I thought my size made me a burden. Now I know it makes me strong enough to carry children to safety. I thought my differences made me worthless. Now I know they make me uniquely qualified to understand both communities." The debate that followed was intense. Some legislators argued that allowing white people to become legally Cherokee would undermine removal policies. Others worried that recognizing Cherokee citizenship would give tribes too much political power. Still others questioned whether a woman, especially one with Clara's unconventional background, could handle such significant diplomatic responsibilities. But the counter-arguments were compelling. The Oak Ridge crisis had demonstrated that cooperation saved lives while conflict cost them. Cherokee agricultural techniques were proving more sustainable than traditional white farming methods. Most importantly, the region desperately needed someone who could prevent the misunderstandings and conflicts that regularly erupted between the two communities. After 3 days of debate, the vote was close but decisive. Clara Bearhart would be recognized as the first official cultural liaison between Cherokee and white communities in Tennessee Territory, with full legal authority to represent both groups in matters of mutual concern. The historic decision was announced by Governor Harrison himself. Miss Bearheart has proven that identity is not about the circumstances of our birth, but about the choices we make and the communities we serve. If she can save children's lives while bridging cultural differences, then perhaps our definitions of citizenship need to evolve as well. As Clara left the Capitol building, she found herself surrounded by people whose reactions ranged from celebration to curiosity to outright hostility. Some white settlers remained convinced that any cooperation with Indians was betrayal of white interests. Some Cherokee people worried that too much integration would cost them their cultural identity. But Clara also saw something new in many faces: hope. Hope that the endless cycle of conflict and misunderstanding might finally be broken by someone who understood both worlds from the inside. The train ride back to Cherokee territory gave Clara time to reflect on the impossible journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had been property sold at auction. Now she was a government official with the legal authority to shape policy affecting thousands of lives. But the real transformation wasn't in her titles or responsibilities, it was in how she saw herself. When Clara arrived back at the Cherokee village, she found the entire community waiting to welcome her home. Children who had learned to read using the integrated curriculum she had developed ran to greet her. Women who had taught her beadwork and traditional crafts embraced her with pride. Men who had initially been skeptical of adopting a white woman now treated her with the respect due a proven leader. Elizabeth Morningstar, now in her 80s but still sharp as a blade, smiled with deep satisfaction as Clara approached. "Well?" the elderly woman asked. "Did they understand what we knew from the beginning?" "They're learning," Clara replied. "Just like I had to learn." That evening, as the community gathered to hear about Clara's success in Nashville, Sarah Clearwater approached with the serene expression that indicated another vision was forming. "The spirits show me something new," the medicine woman announced. "Clara Bearheart's work is expanding. Other territories are watching what happens here. If this model succeeds, it will spread across the continent." Clara felt the weight of that possibility. The work she was doing in Tennessee could influence how white and Indian communities interacted from Georgia to California. The broken woman, who had been sold like cattle, might become the foundation for a new approach to American expansion, one based on cooperation rather than conquest. But Sarah's vision held one more surprise. "There is also something else the spirits show," the medicine woman continued with a mysterious smile. "Clara Bearheart will not walk this path alone. Someone is coming who will understand her journey and share her work." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Someone?" Elizabeth chuckled. "The spirits rarely provide clear details about matters of the heart, child. But they do suggest that your story of transformation is far from over." As autumn settled over the Tennessee mountains, Clara established her new office in a building that straddled the boundary between Cherokee territory and white settlement, a physical symbol of her role as a bridge between two worlds. Her days were filled with mediating disputes, coordinating medical emergencies, and developing educational programs that taught children from both communities about each other's cultures. But her evenings were spent in the Cherokee village that had become her true home, sharing meals with Elizabeth, learning new crafts from the women who had welcomed her, and helping Joseph plan for a future where Cherokee people could thrive without losing their identity. The work wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges, new conflicts, new people who couldn't understand how someone could belong to both worlds simultaneously. But Clara had learned something crucial: the qualities that made her different, her size, her experiences with suffering, her understanding of what it felt like to be rejected, also made her uniquely qualified for this work. 1 year after her adoption ceremony, Clara Bearheart received news that would test everything she had built. The federal government was considering a new policy that would either expand the Tennessee model to other territories or shut it down entirely as too dangerous to established Indian policy. Officials from Washington were coming to evaluate her work to determine whether cooperation between white and Cherokee communities was genuinely successful or simply a dangerous experiment that needed to be ended before it spread. As Clara prepared for this ultimate test of everything she had achieved, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From auction block to government office, from broken victim to community leader, from someone who saw her differences as weaknesses to someone who understood them as strengths. The woman who had been sold like cattle had become Clara Bearheart, Cherokee citizen, territorial official, and living proof that transformation was possible for anyone brave enough to embrace their true self. Standing at her office window, looking out over a community where Cherokee and white children played together, where traditional healers worked alongside trained doctors, where two cultures had learned to strengthen each other rather than destroy each other, Clara smiled with deep satisfaction. She had found her golden heart not by changing who she was, but by finding people who could see who she had always been meant to be. And in saving herself, she had created a model that might save countless others. The broken woman was gone forever. In her place stood Clara Bearheart, bridge between worlds, protector of children, living testament to the truth that sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths when we find the right place to use them. Her transformation was complete, but her story would continue to inspire others for generations to come. Because sometimes the most unlikely people become the most essential ones, and sometimes being sold like cattle is the first step toward discovering you were always meant to soar. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.